Hey folks, welcome back to another Dice Tower preview. I'm Mark, and today we're taking a look at Hedge Mage, which is brought to you by Floodgate Games. It's for 2 to 4 players, ages 10 and up, and games generally run about 45 minutes. In this neighborhood of competitive mages, your rival to the right has stolen your favorite gnomes and put them to sleep in their garden as their lawn decor. Send your mages through your neighbor's growing hedge maze to wake up your gnomes and rescue them. Meanwhile, the nosy neighbor to your left has infiltrated your garden and is trying to steal your, admittedly ill-gotten gnomes from your own garden. Fend off your neighbor's mages with a clever hedge maze of your own to defend the gnomes from abduction. So, your goal is a simple one. Build a hedge maze of polyominos to prevent your rivals from stealing your gnomes, all while navigating your other neighbor's maze to nab their gnomes. To win, you'll need to harness your horticulture magic to gather the greatest gnome collection. So what you see in front of me is a game already at its end. With hedge maze in place, gnomes that have been awakened, some gnomes are still asleep, but some gnomes have been rescued, and you'll see the rescued gnomes on their Gnome Suite Gnome board. And this is what you're going to score from at the end of the game. Now, some of the setup here is going to be related to your different gnome ceremony cards. So you have 3 different types. You've got flower, mushroom, and pumpkin. Now, the pumpkin and the mushroom are really going to set up where the 2 tunnels are on your garden board. And they're just these little tokens that look like a mud patch. But those are the tunnels that will take the gnomes back to your Gnome Suite Gnome. And you'll see on these ceremony cards that there are different ways to wake up the different types of gnomes. And for every game you play, you'll have a different set of these, so you can mix and match however you see fit. They do recommend you play with certain ones at the beginning, but in general, we found that it was really fun to just mix and match and have the game play differently every time, because that really dictates what you're going to be doing in the maze in order to pick up those gnomes and wake them up. So at the start of the game, you will kick it off with an empty garden, other than those sleeping gnomes, and your 2 wizards are going to be on the board, the player to your right. And of course, the player to your left will have their wizards on your board. So it's a pretty interesting mix as you play and move and play simultaneously through the different phases, which is really nice. But to kick things off, you're going to have an empty garden, and you start to put out the maze in order to block your opponent from getting the gnomes and waking them up and getting them out. So along with that garden, you're going to have all the pieces for the hedge maze, and you're going to have your Gnome Suite Gnome house where you're trying to bring your gnomes to, and this will be used for scoring at the end of the game. Also, you'll get 4 movement cubes, bonuses that you can use through the course of the game, and there are ways to get more. So when you bring gnomes back to the Gnome Suite Gnome, there are bonuses to be had, either movement, or you'll get new sigils, or you might get spring mushrooms, and you actually get to start the game with the spring mushroom because it allows you to catapult from one space to the next, or on top of a hedge, which is really nice. And each player will be dealt a special card, your favorite gnome card, and you'll be keeping this secret until the end of the game. So you'll know which mushrooms that you need to keep an eye on to keep in your garden, prevent your opponent from stealing them, so you can get extra points for that particular type of gnome, which is key. It really is a big point swing if you have a lot of your gnomes in your garden. Every game of Hedge Mage is defined by 10 hedge cards, so you have 10 rounds in order to get your gnomes home and save them and get points. So those cards are going to represent the polyominos that you're going to be putting out into your garden. Now, you have 13 polyominos, and there's only 12 cards, so you'll be shuffling the 12 cards and discarding 2, and then you have your deck of 10 that you'll be playing with. And that defines all the different rounds of the game. And also, you have that 13th piece, that 2x, and that's going to save you in some instances where the card calls for a larger piece to be placed, but you just don't have room for it. So you can swap it out for the little 2x piece. So it just gives you some options and prevents you from being stuck. Gameplay here is very straightforward. There are 2 phases to every round. And the first phase is the maze building phase. And in each of these phases, all players will play simultaneously. So the first phase is building your maze. You're going to draw a hedge card showing you which tile piece to put into play. And you simply are going to be putting it out in a way to block your opponent from getting gnomes out of your garden. But also, you're placing it in a way to get points, movement points. If you look at these tiles, they have a sigil on them. And you need to have tiles in the same row and same column as the tile you just placed with sigils on them in order to gain even more points. So at the start of the game, you'll only be placing your first tile, which means you only get 1 movement point. But later game, things start to get really interesting, very puzzly. So in this example here, you see the T gets placed. You will generate 1 point for the hedge you place and 1 for each hedge in the row and column that the sigil overlaps. So that gives us 5 in this example. So you'll have that many movement points for your wizards and your gnomes that are awake. Also, it's very important to note that when you create this maze in your garden, a couple things to be mindful of. You cannot cut off parts of the garden. You cannot isolate parts of the garden. You have to have full access so the gnomes and the wizards, the mages, can move around and get full access to everywhere they need to. It might be a long way around, but as long as they have access, that's fine. You also cannot create a bunch. You can't create a shrubbery. So 4 tiles together in your hedge, that is not allowed either. So those are key things. But after everyone has placed their hedge piece and calculated their movement, then it's time for phase 2, the maze running. So this is where you get to spend those movement points, and you'll be doing it on your neighbor's board in their garden, moving your mages and any awake gnomes. So what's also cool about your movement points, be it 4, 7, 10, whatever you came up with, those points are per character. So per the different mages and for each of the different types of gnomes. So if you have only purple gnomes awake, you can only move 1 of those gnomes. But otherwise, you can move a red, an orange, and a purple if they're awake. Now you also have bonus movement, potentially. You're going to start the game with 4 bonus cubes. You can spin them, add it on to your movement, or when you rescue gnomes, you potentially are going to get bonuses of movement and you get more cubes. But you can only ever have 6 cubes at a time, so don't forget to spin them because they really can help you out. Now, first thing you're probably going to start off with is moving your mages because you don't have any awake gnomes yet. And the way that works is that you move the mage around, and if they're adjacent to a gnome, you can spend a point to pick them up. Or if you just move onto the gnome, you just pick it up for free. And you lay them face down on top of the mage and it's still asleep. So consulting the ceremony cards will show you how they need to wake up. So for the pumpkin gnomes, in this case, you have to get them in one of the 4 corners of the board and then in one of the 4 spaces there. And that will wake them up, and you'll stand them up when you do so. So once that gnome is up and awake, they can use the same points in order to move around the board independently from the mages. It's just when they're asleep that you really need to use the mages to move them around. And you can even hand off, to your other mage if you need to, a gnome that's asleep, and trying to get them to the right place to wake them up. So here, for the mushroom gnomes, you'll have to drop them off on top of a hedge. And if you move next to a hedge with your mage, you can drop them off that way. Or if you drop them off on one of these springy mushrooms, they can bounce up on top of the hedge. Also, the mages can jump on top of the hedges by using those bouncy mushrooms as well. So there's multiple ways to get there, but you might need to do that just to pass them over a hedge to your other mage if they're asleep, or if you just try to get them off. And anytime you jump off of the hedge, that's totally fine. You're not gonna get hurt or anything. There's no requirements around that other than a movement point. And then finally, for your flower, it just has to be within the row or column of the escape or the tunnel in order to wake up. And once again, everyone's awake, you can start to move them around the board. It gets really interesting. Some very abstract ideas here, and again, very puzzly. So as soon as one of those gnomes reaches a tunnel, again, they have to be awake. You can't drop a sleeping gnome in the tunnel. It'll just clog it up. So if they're awake, they can go to the tunnel and then they just go to the home sweet home board. And you'll put them on here starting left and moving to the right. And the rightmost spot will be how many points you're going to get for that particular game, for that particular row of the different colored gnomes. So the thing too though is that this is where you can get your bonuses when you drop them off. You'll get movement bonuses, you can get spring mushroom bonuses, or you can get sigil bonuses. If you get a sigil bonus, then you can play it on your next play and place it on your tile that you put in the garden in order to get an extra movement point. And they all are color coded to the different players' colors and so forth. So those are the basics of what you're doing. And then at the end of the game, when you run out of cards, you've placed all your maze pieces, then you're going to finally score. Scoring here is super straightforward. For each gnome that's in your garden still, you're going to get 2 points. And for every awake gnome, you get an extra point. And of course, for all your favorite gnomes, you get bonus points for that as well. And then for the gnomes inside the home sweet home, the ones that are on the furthest to the right in each of the rows are going to give you points as well. And you total it up, and whoever has the most points will be the ultimate hedge mage. All right, folks, just a reminder once again, this has been a Dice Tower paid preview, and everything you've seen has been in prototype form, so keep a close eye on the campaign for any changes that still may occur. Now, with that said, yes, you can see that all the mages are in white. In the final game, they will be in the color of the different players. And you know, it is very much a puzzly game, abstract at times, as you create your maze to prevent your fellow player from getting all those gnomes out of your garden, because you want to hold on to those, right? And I really like that the game changes up every time you play based on those ceremony cards, and also which puzzle pieces you're going to be using throughout the hedge, and setting that up and just creating this interesting maze that folks have to get around and maneuver with their different types of mages and all the different gnomes they have in play. There's some really fun things there for sure. But folks, ultimately, if this looks like something of interest to you, I'm sure they'd appreciate your support. So I think that's it for me, and until next time, we'll see you at the table.
Hey everybody, thanks for watching this video. If you like this review or whatever you just watched, wasn't it amazing? Check out our channel, Dice Tower. We have all kinds of things. We review games, we do top 10s, we play games live. It's all about board games, but especially the people who play them. Check out Dice Tower YouTube channel.